think, therefore I am. Buddha would disagree. Chapter 1. The Sentence. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. You know this sentence. Almost everyone who has ever taken a philosophy class knows this sentence. It is, quite possibly, the most famous sentence in the history of Western thought. 4 Latin words. 4 words on which René Descartes, writing in the 1640s, built the entire foundation of modern philosophy. 4 words that became the starting point for 3 centuries of European thinking about knowledge, mind, self, and what it means for you to exist. And 2,500 years earlier, on the other side of the world, in a text that scholars consider one of the oldest in the entire Buddhist canon, older, by most reckoning, than any of the more familiar suttas, one man looked at that exact sentence and came to the opposite verdict. Not the same words, of course. He spoke a different language, but the same sentence, the same thought, the same claim. I am the thinker. And where Descartes said, "This is the foundation of everything you can know," the Buddha said, "This is the root of every form of suffering that has ever arisen." Same sentence. Opposite verdict. That is the story of this video. 2 men, 25 centuries apart, both using disciplined first-person investigation to examine what happens when a mind turns around and looks at itself. Both arrived at the same pivotal moment. The moment a mind says, "I am the one who is thinking." And from that identical point, they walked in exactly opposite directions. In the next hour, I want to take you with me to that point, to the exact sentence where these 2 traditions meet and then separate. I want to show you what Descartes actually found, and what he assumed he found, and why the difference matters. I want to show you what the Buddha saw in one of the oldest lines in the Pali canon that Descartes did not see. And I want to do something more difficult than either of these. I want to let both of them be right about different things and let neither of them win, because this is not a contest. It is a meeting. And meetings, when they are honest, change both participants. Let me take you first to a cold room in Germany in the winter of 1619. Descartes was 23 years old. He had finished his formal education at the Jesuit College of La Flèche, travelled a little, enlisted as a gentleman soldier in the Dutch army, a soldier who did no actual fighting, a station arranged so a young man of means could see something of the world. The army was wintering in Neuburg and the Donau in Bavaria. It was November, it was cold, and on the night of November 10th, 11th, we have the dates from his own notebook, he shut himself into a small room that he could heat with a stove, and he went to sleep, and he had 3 dreams. In the first dream, phantoms surrounded him, and a whirlwind spun him toward the walls of a building. In the second, he woke inside the dream to a sound like thunder, and saw sparks scattered around the room. In the third, he found a book on a table, a dictionary, and beside it, a collection of poetry. He opened the poetry book at random. The line his eyes fell on was, "Quod vitae sectabor iter." What path in life shall I follow? Descartes woke convinced that the dreams were a message, not from any ordinary source, a revelation. He wrote in his notebook, in Latin, of mirabilis scientiae fundamenta, the foundations of a marvelous science. He'd been shown, he believed, that his life's work would be to build human knowledge on a new and certain foundation, one that could not be shaken. Keep that image. A young man in a cold room in Bavaria, waking from 3 dreams and deciding, on the strength of those dreams, to rebuild all of human knowledge from the ground up. because 22 years later, when he finally wrote the book that would do it, he began exactly where his dreams had left him. He began by doubting everything. The project of the Meditations on First Philosophy, published in 1641, is in a way extraordinarily simple. Descartes asks a single question: is there anything I cannot possibly be wrong about? Anything at all? He starts with the senses. They have deceived him before. A stick looks bent in water, a tower looks round from a distance and square up close. So the senses are not indubitable. He moves to ordinary perception. The table in front of me, the hand writing these words. But perhaps I am dreaming. Perhaps none of this is real. He goes further. Perhaps even mathematics is suspect. Perhaps there is an evil demon, a powerful deceiving spirit who is arranging every thought in my mind, including my conviction that 2 + 3 = 5, just to fool me. If that is possible, and Descartes argues it is possible, then even arithmetic cannot be trusted. This is methodical doubt, not casual skepticism. A deliberate, relentless examination of every belief a human being could have, testing whether any of them can survive the assault of an evil demon. At the end of the first meditation, everything is gone. The senses, the body, the world, mathematics. All of it is in principle doubtable. And then, in the second meditation, Descartes finds the one thing the demon cannot touch. Here is where we need to slow down, because almost everyone who has ever heard of Descartes thinks he said, "I think, therefore I am," a premise and a conclusion, an argument, a syllogism. He did not say that, not in the Meditations. In the Meditations, the book he considered his most philosophically careful, the sentence reads, "Ego sum, ego existo, I am, I exist. No therefore, no because, no inference at all." What Descartes is pointing to in the second meditation is not an argument, it is a moment, a particular experience that happens in the act of meditating. The meditator tries to doubt his own existence, and in the very act of attempting that doubt, discovers that something is doing the doubting, that something, whatever it is, cannot coherently deny its own activity. I am, I exist. This proposition, Descartes says, is necessarily true whenever it is conceived by me or thought by me. This is not, I think, therefore I am. This is, in the act of trying to doubt, I catch myself existing. The therefore creeps back in later, in the Principles of Philosophy in 1644, where Descartes restores the inferential form. Ego cogito, ergo sum, sive existo, for the sake of teaching it to students. And in the earlier discourse on the method, in French, we get the phrase that has passed into every language, je pense, donc je suis. But the philosophically precise version, the one Descartes himself considered most careful, has no therefore in it at all. It is not an inference from premise to conclusion. It is, as Descartes told his critics, a simplici mentis intuitu, a simple intuition of the mind, an immediate seeing. Hold that carefully, because when the Buddha 2500 years earlier looked at that same moment, the moment a mind catches itself existing in the act of thinking, he did not dispute that the moment was real. He saw the same thing Descartes saw, a mind caught in the act, unable to deny its own activity. He just drew the opposite conclusion from it. Descartes asked, "What is this thing that is thinking?" And he answered, "Res cogitans," a thinking thing, a substance, unified, continuous, immaterial, distinct from the body. The one thing in the universe whose existence I can be absolutely certain of. The foundation. The Buddha asked a different question. He asked, Where does suffering come from? And the answer he gave, in a text we will come to shortly, a text in some of the oldest surviving strata of Buddhist literature, pointed to exactly the same moment Descartes pointed to. The moment the mind says, "I am the thinker." Only, the Buddha did not call it a foundation. He called it mula, the root of what the tradition calls papanca, the mental proliferation out of which every form of suffering grows. Same moment, same sentence. And one man called it the ground of certainty, and the other called it the ground of sorrow. How can that be? That is what the next 50 minutes are for. Chapter 2. What Descartes found. So Descartes has caught something. In the wreckage of universal doubt, with senses gone, the world gone, mathematics gone, everything swept away by the possibility of an evil demon, one thing remains: something is thinking. And whatever that something is, it cannot coherently deny its own existence. But now comes the question that will determine the next 300 years of Western thought. What is this thing that is thinking? Descartes' answer is specific. It is not just something. It is res cogitans, a thinking thing. And by thing, he means a substance, something that exists in its own right, not as a property of something else. He describes it carefully in the second meditation, a thing that doubts, that understands, that affirms, that denies, that wills, that refuses, that imagines, and that senses. A single thing, doing all of these, unified, indivisible, and, this is the move that will matter most, immaterial. This is where the architecture of Descartes' world begins to take shape. Because if the thinking thing is immaterial, if it has no extension in space, no length, no width, no weight, then it is fundamentally different from the body. The body is res extensa, extended stuff. It takes up space, it can be divided, cut off a foot, and you have less body, but you cannot cut off a piece of mind. The mind, Descartes argues in the sixth meditation, can be clearly and distinctly understood as entirely non-extended. The body can be clearly and distinctly understood as entirely non-thinking, and whatever can be clearly and distinctly understood as separate. God has the power to create as genuinely separate. Therefore, mind and body are two different kinds of substance, two different orders of reality. This is substance dualism, and it is one of the most influential and most contested ideas in the entire history of philosophy, because it creates a problem that Descartes himself spent years trying to solve, and never did. If mind and body are two entirely different kinds of stuff, one immaterial, one material, how do they interact? You feel this problem in your own experience every day. You decide to lift your arm, and the arm lifts. A thought, immaterial according to Descartes, causes a physical movement. A pin pricks your finger, and you feel pain. A physical event causes a mental experience. Something is crossing the gap between these two orders of reality. But if they are genuinely different substances, with nothing in common, how does the crossing happen? Descartes proposed an answer. He suggested that the point of interaction was the pineal gland, a small structure near the center of the brain, unpaired. Unlike most brain structures that come in left-right pairs, the mind, Descartes thought, acts on the body through this gland, tilting it subtly, directing the flow of what he called animal spirits through the nerves. It is not a good answer. Descartes himself seems to have known it was not a good answer. He returned to the problem repeatedly and never resolved it to his own satisfaction. Subsequent philosophers, Malebranche, Leibniz, others, would spend the next century proposing alternative solutions. each more elaborate than the last, none of them convincing. The mind-body problem, as it came to be called, is still with us today. It is arguably the central unsolved problem in the philosophy of mind, but notice what happened. In the act of finding his foundation, I think, therefore I am, Descartes also created the deepest problem in Western philosophy. The same gesture that secured the existence of the thinking self also severed it from the body, from the world, from everything it was trying to reconnect with. The foundation, it turns out, comes with a crack in it, and that crack runs through the middle of every subsequent attempt to understand what a human being is. Keep that. We will need it. There is a second move Descartes makes in the Meditations that often gets overlooked, and it matters for understanding how his system works as a whole. Having established the cogito, I am, I exist, Descartes is still trapped. He has one certainty, himself as a thinking thing. But everything else, the external world, other people, mathematics, his own body, is still hostage to the evil demon. How does he get them back? His answer is God. In the third and fifth Meditations, Descartes offers two proofs for the existence of God. Proofs that struck many of his contemporaries as unconvincing, and that strike most philosophers today the same way. But the function of God in Descartes' system is what matters here, not whether the proofs work. God is the guarantor. God is the bridge between private certainty and public knowledge. Because if God exists and is no deceiver, then the clear and distinct ideas that seem self-evident to the meditating mind, including mathematics, including the existence of an external world, really are true. The evil demon is defeated. Knowledge is restored. The sequence runs. Cogito to God to external world to science. Remove God from that chain, and the entire structure collapses back into solipsism. One mind alone, certain only of itself. This is not a minor technical detail. It is the load-bearing wall of modern Western epistemology. And it was built in the years just after Galileo's condemnation by the Church. Years when the relationship between faith and reason, theology and science, was not an academic question, but a dangerous one. Descartes dedicated the Meditations to the faculty of theology at the Sorbonne. He was, among other things, trying to survive. He did not always survive well. In 1635, while living in the Netherlands, Descartes had a daughter. Her name was Francine. Her mother was a servant named Helena Jans. The child was baptized, loved, and, in 1640, at the age of 5, died of scarlet fever. Descartes wrote to his friend Pollet that he had felt the greatest sorrow he had ever experienced in his life. And then he added something that tells you everything about the man. He defended the tears. He wrote that natural grief, expressed with tears, was not contrary to reason, that a philosopher who felt nothing at the death of his child would be less human, not more. This matters because Descartes is often caricatured as the philosopher who severed mind from body, reason from feeling, thought from life. And he did sever them, philosophically, but he lived in a body. He grieved in a body. He knew the gap he had opened in his philosophy was also a gap in himself. 9 years later, Queen Christina of Sweden invited him to Stockholm to give her philosophy lessons. The lessons were at 5 a.m, in an unheated library in a Swedish winter. Descartes, who had kept a lifelong habit of staying in bed until late morning, a privilege he had negotiated even as a schoolboy at La Flèche, got up in the dark and walked through the cold. Within months, he developed pneumonia. He died on February 11th, 1650. He was 53. The man who had found certainty in the act of thinking died, as everyone does. in a body that stopped working. Now, before we turn to the Buddhist response, I want you to hear two voices from within Western philosophy itself, not because they settle the question, but because they show that the doubts about Descartes' I did not begin with the Buddha, they began at home. The first is Georg Christoph Lichtenberg, an 18th century German physicist and aphorist. His objection is one sentence long, and it is a scalpel. We should say it thinks, just as we say it lightens. When lightning strikes, no one asks who is doing the lightning. It lightens. The it is a grammatical placeholder, not a person. Lichtenberg's point, when Descartes says I think, he has already smuggled in the very thing he claims to have discovered. The I is a requirement of Latin grammar, not a finding of philosophy. The second is David Hume, writing in the 1730s. When I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other, of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I never catch myself. Hume looks for the self that Descartes claims to have found, and finds instead a bundle of passing perceptions. No owner, no center, no unified thing doing the perceiving. These are not Buddhist observations. These are Western philosophers, within their own tradition, noticing that the I Descartes caught in the act of doubting may not be what he thought it was. The fish was real, what he described it as. That is where the questions begin. And now we can turn to the tradition that asked those questions first and went furthest with them, to a text older than Descartes by 2.5 millennia, to a single line in the Sutta Nipata, to the moment the Buddha looked at the sentence, I am the thinker, and called it the root of everything that binds. Chapter 3. What Buddha Found. The text is called the Tuvataka Sutta. It lives in the 4th chapter of the Sutta Nipata, the Atthakavagga, the chapter of eights, which scholars widely regard as one of the oldest surviving layers of the Pali canon. Older than the more systematic suttas of the Majjhima and Samyutta Nikayas, closer by most reckoning to the voice of the historical Buddha than almost any other text we have. And in verse 916 of that text, there is a line, one line. Here it is, in Pali, Mulam papañca saṅkhāra, mantā asmī, sabam uprooted. Let me unpack that slowly. Mulam, the root, papañca saṅkhāra, of the reckonings of papanca, which we will come to in a moment. Sabam uprooted is to be utterly stopped, cut off, uprooted entirely. And in the center, the hinge, mantā asmī. I am the thinker. Now, a note of precision. The Pali word mantā is the nominative form of mantā, an agent noun from the root man, to think. The thinker. That is how the American monk and translator Thanissaro Bhikkhu renders it. I am the thinker. Other scholars, K.R. Norman, Bhikkhu Bodhi, the traditional commentaries, read the phrase differently. Through thinking, I am, or through wisdom, I am. The readings diverge on whether the thinker is what is being claimed or how the claim arises. But notice, in every reading, the core is the same. The claim asmī, I am, is what the verse names as the root. I am is the pivot, whether you read it as I am the thinker or through thinking I am. The target is identical. The moment a mind claims ownership of its own activity, I will use Thanissaro's rendering throughout this video, I am the thinker, because it creates the sharpest point of contact with Descartes. But I want you to know it is his interpretive choice, not universal consensus. The philosophical point holds either way, and here is something worth pausing on. The Pali word mantā, thinker, comes from the root man, to think. That same root in the ancient language scholars call Proto-Indo-European traveled west through Latin and became mens, mind. The mind that Descartes' Cogito proves to exist. We will return to this connection. For now, just hold it. The word the Buddha used for the thinker and the word behind Descartes' thinking thing grew from the same ancient seed. So what does the verse actually say? The root of papanca's reckonings, I am the thinker, is to be utterly stopped. Descartes catches the mind in the act of thinking and says, here is the foundation. The Buddha catches the same moment and says, here is the root, dig it up. But the root of what? The verse says papanca, and papanca is one of those Pali terms that does not translate into a single English word, because it names a process that Western languages do not have a single word for. The scholar Bhikkhu Jnanananda called it conceptual proliferation. Thanissaro Bhikkhu translates it as objectification. What it points to is the mind's tendency, automatic, relentless, self-sustaining, to take any moment of experience and spin it outward into a web of concepts, categories, narratives, identities, comparisons, judgments, and positions. A sound arises. Papanca turns it into, my sound, their noise. I was here first. They are being rude. I am the kind of person who deserves quiet. They are the kind of person who does not care. From one moment of contact, ear meets sound. The mind constructs an entire world of self and other, right and wrong, mine and theirs. And at the center of every proliferation, holding it all together, is the claim, I am. The Samyutta Nikaya makes this explicit. In SN 35.248, the Buddha says directly, asmī, papañca. I am. This is a proliferation. The claim, I am, is not the discovery of a fact. It is the beginning of a process, and the process generates suffering. Because every position constructed around I am is a position that can be threatened, that can be lost, that requires defense. The Mullapariyaya Sutta, the root sequence, the very first sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, MN1, lays this out systematically. The untaught ordinary person, the Buddha says, takes every category of experience, earth, water, fire, air, beings, gods, the all, and manyati it, conceives it. That verb, manyati, comes from the same root man. To conceive, to appropriate through thinking. The ordinary person takes each phenomenon and intrudes into it. This is mine, this is me, this is myself. The entire cognitive structure that makes Descartes' move possible, the move from thinking is occurring to I am a thinking thing, is, in the Mullapariyaya, the signature of the untaught mind. Not an achievement, a habit, the oldest habit, the one the Buddha says must be understood first before anything else. But if I am the thinker is not a foundation, if it is a construction, then what is thinking? What is actually happening when a thought arises? Here is where the Buddhist analysis becomes precise in a way that is directly relevant to Descartes' claim. Descartes says, thinking is the activity of a substance, res cogitans, that is simple, unified, continuous, and immaterial. One thing, doing one kind of activity. The Buddhist analysis says, what you are calling a thinking thing is actually 5 processes occurring together, none of which is a self. These are the 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, fabrications, consciousness. And the key move is not that these are 5 parts of a self. That would still be Descartes' architecture, just subdivided. The key move is that each of them, examined closely, turns out to be conditioned, impermanent, and not self. SN 22.59. The aggregate that matters most for the Descartes question is the fourth, saṅkhāra, fabrications. This is the aggregate that includes thinking, intending, willing, planning, all the activities Descartes attributed to res cogitans. And the Buddhist analysis of saṅkhāra is devastating to the Cartesian claim. In SN 22.79, the Buddha says, saṅkhāra saṅkhātam abhisaṅkharanti. Fabrications fabricate the fabricated. Thinking is not transparent. Thinking is not a window through which a unified self peers at reality. Thinking is active construction. It builds. And what it builds includes the sense that there is a builder. This is the direct Buddhist reframe of the Cogito. Descartes says, I caught the thinker in the act, and the thinker is a substance. The Buddhist analysis says, you caught thinking in the act. The thinker is something the thinking constructed. You found a real process and mistook it for a real thing. And consciousness, the fifth aggregate, vijnana, is not, on this analysis, an independent substance either. The monk Sati once claimed that this very consciousness transmigrates, that consciousness is a continuous, self-identical thing that travels from life to life. The Buddha corrected him sharply in MN 38. Apart from a requisite condition, there is no coming into play of consciousness, and he gave a simile. You do not call a fire simply fire. You call it a wood fire, a grass fire, a dung fire, named by what it burns. Consciousness is named by what it arises dependent on. Eye consciousness, ear consciousness, mind consciousness. There is no free-floating awareness independent of conditions. What Descartes called res cogitans is, on Buddhist analysis, not a thing at all. It is a process, arising at the moment of contact, ceasing when the conditions for it cease. And here is where the deepest payoff arrives, the one planted in Chapter 2, when Descartes created his mind-body problem and could not solve it. Descartes' architecture, two substances, res cogitans and res extensa, mind and body, immaterial and material, separate. And the central question his philosophy left behind, how do they interact? The Buddhist framework never builds that architecture. It has nama, name, which includes feeling, perception, fabrications, consciousness, contact, attention, and rupa, form. But nama and rupa are not two separate substances. They are two aspects of a single conditioned process. In the Digha Nikaya, DN 15, the Buddha gives a simile. Two sheaves of reeds, leaning against each other. Remove one, the other falls. Consciousness and name and form are mutually dependent. They do not exist independently, then somehow reach across a gap to interact. There is no gap. The ontology that generates the mind-body problem, the insistence that mind and matter are fundamentally different kinds of stuff, never gets constructed in the first place. The Buddhist response to Descartes' mind-body problem is not a better solution. It is the dissolution of the question. The problem arises from the architecture. Change the architecture, and the problem does not arise. And this brings us to a subtlety that is easy to miss and essential. The Buddhist response to Descartes is not there is no self. It is not the mirror image of Descartes' there is a self. In the Sabbasava Sutta, MN2, the Buddha lists both I have a self and I have no self among the views that arise from ayaniso manasikara. Inappropriate attention. Both are wrong views. Both are traps, and when the wanderer Vacchagotta asked the Buddha directly, is there a self? Is there no self? The Buddha was silent. SN 44.1. Oh, he did not answer either way. Later, he explained to Ananda, To say there is a self would be siding with the eternalists. To say there is no self would be siding with the annihilationists, and it would confuse Vajragota further. Doesn't this mean the self I used to have has been destroyed? The Buddha's response to the cogito is not, "You are wrong, there is no thinker." It is, "You are asking the wrong question." The question, does the thinker exist, is itself a product of papanca, a proliferation that generates suffering regardless of which answer you give. The right question is not, "What am I?" but "What should I attend to?" so that suffering ceases and skillful qualities arise. This is the method contrast. Descartes asks, "What can I not doubt?" The Buddha asks, "What should I attend to?" Descartes' method, doubt everything, find the indubitable, leads to the cogito, to res cogitans, to God, to the external world, to science. The Buddha's method, attend appropriately in light of suffering and its cessation, leads to the Four Noble Truths, to the aggregates, to dependent origination, to liberation. The Kalama Sutta, AN 3.65, makes the contrast vivid. The Buddha explicitly sets aside two of the tools Descartes relies on most: takahetu, logical conjecture, and nyahetu, inferential reasoning, not because they are worthless, but because they do not, by themselves, lead to freedom from suffering. What does? Atanava janayata. You yourselves know. Direct investigation, tested against consequences, checked against the judgment of the wise. Not a priori deduction from an indubitable premise. Empirical, first person, pragmatic, and social. Both methods begin with discipline. Both distrust received opinion. Both insist on first-person investigation. But they diverge at the crucial moment. What does the investigation serve? Certainty or liberation? Knowledge of what exists or freedom from what binds? And it is that difference, not a difference in intelligence, not a difference in rigor, but a difference in purpose, that sends them in opposite directions from the same sentence. Chapter 4, where they meet and part. We have spent the last 30 minutes with two men, in two traditions, separated by 25 centuries and the width of a continent. One sitting in a heated room in Bavaria, the other teaching by a river in northern India. Both examining the same thing, the activity of a mind aware of its own activity. Both arriving at the same pivotal moment, and both walking away from it in different directions. Before we follow those directions to their ends, I want to do something that is harder than it sounds. I want to name precisely where these two traditions meet, not vaguely, not as a polite gesture, but with enough specificity that the meeting means something. And then I want to name precisely where they part, with enough honesty that the parting means something too. 3 convergences, then 3 honest disagreements. The first convergence is method. Both Descartes and the Buddha begin with a disciplined refusal to accept what they have been told. Descartes rejects the authority of the senses, of tradition, of received opinion, of the church. Everything gets thrown into the furnace of doubt. The Buddha, in the Kalama Sutta, AN 3.65, rejects tradition, hearsay, scripture, logical conjecture, inferential reasoning, surface plausibility, the authority of teachers. Everything gets set aside that has not been tested in first-person experience. The formal structure is remarkably similar. Suspend what you think you know. Attend closely to what is actually given. Proceed only from there. This is not a trivial similarity. In the history of world thought, the number of traditions that begin by systematically dismantling their own received beliefs is small. Most traditions begin by asserting something. These two begin by doubting. They share a rare intellectual courage, the willingness to stand in the wreckage of everything familiar and see what remains. The divergence comes at the next step. What close attention finds? Descartes finds a self-certifying thinker. The Buddha finds a dependently arising process. But the commitment to look without flinching, without relying on what someone else has said, that commitment is shared. The second convergence is diagnosis. Both traditions treat ordinary experience as radically unreliable. This is easy to say and difficult to appreciate until you sit with it. Descartes' evil demon, the hypothesis that a powerful deceiver could be arranging all of my experience, moment by moment, so that nothing I perceive is real, is one of the most extreme skeptical scenarios ever proposed in Western philosophy. It says, the gap between how things seem and how things are could be total. Everything you see, hear, touch, think, all of it could be fabricated. The Buddhist concept of avidya, ignorance, combined with papanca, conceptual proliferation, makes a structurally parallel claim. The Mullapariyaya Sutta, M.N. 1, does not say you might be deceived about this or that particular perception. It says the untaught ordinary person manyati conceives with distortion. Every single category of phenomena, earth, water, fire, beings, gods, the all, nibbana itself. The distortion is not occasional. It is systematic. It operates at the root of how the mind processes experience. Both traditions, in other words, are saying, do not trust the way things appear to you. Naive experience taken at face value, is not a safe starting point. You must investigate. You must look beneath the surface. You must be willing to discover that what seemed most obviously true is exactly what needs to be questioned. Again, the divergence comes after the diagnosis. Descartes, having shown that experience is unreliable, looks for something that survives the unreliability and finds the cogito. The Buddha, having shown that experience is pervaded by distortion, looks for the source of the distortion and finds the claim, I am. Same diagnosis, different treatment. The third convergence is the most extraordinary of the three, and it is the one I have been building towards since the opening of this video. Both traditions identify the sentence, I am the thinker, as the pivotal hinge of their entire project, not a peripheral observation, not a minor point, the hinge and scene. For Descartes, I am a thinking thing, res cogitans, is the foundation on which all certain knowledge rests. Without it, there is no God proof, no external world, no science, no mathematics, nothing. Everything depends on that sentence. For the Buddha, I am the thinker, mantā asmī, is the root of papañca, the conceptual proliferation from which every form of suffering grows. Without it, there is no self-construction, no craving, no clinging, no becoming, no birth and death, as experienced from the inside of a mind that claims ownership of its experience. Same sentence, opposite function, foundation in one tradition, root to be uprooted in the other. And here is where the connection becomes not just philosophical, but linguistic, in a way I find almost uncanny. The Pali word mantā, thinker, comes from the root man, to think. That root is ancient. It belongs to Proto-Indo-European, the ancestor language that, over thousands of years, branched into the languages of both India and Europe. In Pali, man gave us mantā, thinker, and manyati, to conceive, to appropriate through thought. In Latin, the same root gave us mens, mind. And mens is the word that stands behind everything Descartes means by cogito and res cogitans, the thinking thing, the mind. So when the Buddha, in one of the oldest verses in the Pali canon, names mantā asmī, I am the thinker, as the root of suffering. And when Descartes, 25 centuries later, names the mens, the thinking mind, as the foundation of certainty, they are not merely making parallel claims in different languages. They are drawing on the same ancient word, the same syllable carried forward through two branches of one language family, arriving at the same crossroads, pointing in opposite directions. The contact point between these two traditions is not just philosophical. It is, quite literally, etymological, written into the history of human language itself. Now, the honest disagreements. 3 of them, and none of them minor. The first, what the investigation ultimately finds. Descartes finds certainty, a unified self whose existence cannot be doubted, and from that certainty, he builds outward, to God, to the external world, to the foundations of science. The project is epistemological. How can I know anything for certain? The Buddha finds that the longing for exactly that kind of certainty, for an indubitable self, a fixed point, a ground that cannot shift, is itself upadana. Clinging, and clinging is the origin of dukkha. The desire for a foundation is the problem, not the solution. On this analysis, Descartes did not solve the human predicament. He expressed it. These are not different answers to the same question. They are different questions. Descartes asks, what survives maximal doubt? The Buddha asks, where does suffering come from? The Cogito answers the first question brilliantly. It does not address the second at all. The second disagreement, the structure of the I, Descartes, simple, unified, continuous, substantial, immaterial. One thing, indivisible, persisting through time. The same I that doubted yesterday is the same I that affirms today. The Buddha, 5 conditioned processes, S and 22.59, arising and ceasing moment by moment. No unity, multiplicity, no permanence, flux, no substance and process, not a small technical disagreement, architecture against anti-architecture, a building against the claim that buildings are the problem. The third disagreement, what philosophy is for. Descartes wants to secure the foundations of knowledge. His project ends with certainty about God, about mathematics, about the external world, the intellectual infrastructure that makes modern science possible. And it worked. Cartesian dualism, for all its problems, gave Western civilization a framework within which physics, chemistry, biology, and medicine could develop with extraordinary power. The Buddha has a different success criterion. In the Kulamalunkyā Sutta, MN 63, a monk named Malunkyaputta demands that the Buddha answer a list of metaphysical questions. Is the world eternal or not? Is the soul the same as the body or different? Does a realized one exist after death? The Buddha refuses. He gives the simile of the poisoned arrow. A man struck by an arrow does not refuse treatment until he knows who shot it, what wood the shaft was made from, what feathers fletched it. The arrow is in him. The task is to remove it. The metaphysical questions Descartes spent the meditations answering are, in the Buddha's framework, questions asked by a man with an arrow in his chest. This is not anti-intellectualism. It is a different definition of what thinking is for. Descartes, thinking secures knowledge. The Buddha, thinking, when properly directed, secures liberation from suffering. Both are serious projects. They aim at different things, and this is the frame I want to leave intact as we move to the close. These two men were not fighting over the same answer. They were using the same sentence, I am the thinker, to open different inquiries. One inquiry asks, what can I know? The other asks, what can I release? Both are worth asking. Both require courage. And the place where they begin, the moment a mind turns around and catches itself in the act of thinking, is exactly the same. They meet there, and they part there. And neither one is wrong about the question he chose to ask. Chapter 5. Close. Let me take you back to the sentence. Je pense, donc je suis. That was the first version. The French, published in 1637, written for a general audience, with a donc that sounds like a conclusion drawn from a premise. Accessible, widely read. The version that passed into every language on earth. Ego sum, ego existo. That was the careful version. The Latin of the Meditations, 1641, where Descartes stripped away the therefore entirely and left only the raw experience. I am, I exist. Not an argument, a moment. The most philosophically precise thing he ever wrote. Ego cogito, ergo sum, sive existo. The textbook version, The Principles, 1644, where he put the connective back in for the sake of students who needed it laid out in steps. The version that became the cliché. The version most people think of when they think of Descartes. The version that, ironically, is the least faithful to what he actually experienced in that moment of radical doubt. 3 formulations of the same discovery. A young man in a cold room in Bavaria, waking from 3 strange dreams, spending 22 years working his way toward a single sentence, and then spending the rest of his life trying to say it exactly right. Quod vitae sectabor iter. What path in life shall I follow? That was the line his eyes fell on, in the dream, in the book of poetry, in the room with the stove. He was 23. He chose the path of certainty. He followed it with extraordinary rigor, extraordinary courage, and a loneliness he could not solve, because the philosophy he built placed the self at the center of everything it could know, and then severed it from everything it wanted to touch. He died in Stockholm, in winter, at 5 a.m, in a body he had spent his life trying to distinguish from his mind. And 25 centuries before that room in Bavaria, in a different part of the world, a man looked at the same moment Descartes would one day look at, the moment a mind catches itself existing in the act of thinking, and said, Mulam papanca saṅkhāra, mantā asmī, sabam uprooted, the root of proliferation's reckonings. I am the thinker is to be utterly stopped, not because the moment is not real, it is real. Something is occurring when a mind turns around and finds itself already active. Both traditions agree on this. The moment is genuine, but what you do with that moment, that is where everything diverges. Descartes said, build on it. It is the one thing the demon cannot touch. From here you can reach God, mathematics, the external world, science, knowledge, certainty. The foundation holds. Build the house. The Buddha said, look closer. What you are calling the thinker is not a thing. It is a process. 5 processes actually, arising together, conditioning each other, ceasing and arising again moment by moment. SN 22.59. You found something real, awareness, present, undeniable, but you described it as a substance, unified and continuous. And that description is where the suffering begins. Not in the awareness, in the claim of ownership, in the 3 words. I am this. One called it the ground on which to stand. The other called it the ground to see through. I said at the beginning that this is not a contest. And it is not. These are not 2 answers competing for the same prize. They are 2 questions, asked with equal seriousness, aimed at different things. Descartes asked, given that everything I have ever believed could be wrong, what can I know for certain? the Buddha asked. Given that everything I have ever clung to has led to suffering, what can I release? The Cogito answers the first question. It does not address the second. The analysis of the 5 aggregates answers the second question. It does not address the first. And the fact that both questions lead to the same sentence, I am the thinker, and then diverge from it, is not a flaw in either tradition. It is a testament to the depth of that sentence, deep enough to be the hinge of 2 entire civilizations' ways of understanding what it means to be alive. The next time you find yourself certain of your own thinking, and you will, because it is the most natural thing in the world, so natural that it feels less like a thought and more like the ground beneath your feet. You are standing exactly where Descartes stood in that room in Germany in winter in 1619, and where the Buddha stood by a river in India 25 centuries before. Both traditions meet you there, at the moment before the next thought, at the moment the mind turns around and catches itself. They go in opposite directions from that moment, one toward certainty, one toward release. The question they leave you with is not which was right. It is, which question are you asking?